Well, I want to ask you about the Made in America Week, but also about the general policy area that you're involved in the White House. And I know you've spoken. You're addressing the problem of a $700 billion trade deficit in goods as a measure of what's bad. If all of these policies, including what you're underscoring at Made in America, if all of them succeed, what's a reasonable target for this administration to reach in terms of a goods trade deficit or surplus?
Well, I think you start with the idea that we've had 15 years of subpar growth, 2% or below. Prior to 2001, we grew at 3.5%. The big difference has been the entry of China in particular into the World Trade Organization and our markets. And we've just been hammered. What that does as a proxy, basically, is it drains essentially the lifeblood out of our manufacturing economy, out of our communities, out of our tax base.
The manufactured goods deficit. I mean, how from $700 billion, you think you could cut it in half over
well,
4
we think
years?
We could, yeah, we'd love to cut it in half.
Cut it in half. That would be a
really
very
hard.
successful
and you can break that down into how we need to do that. A lot of the problem with Germany, Japan, Mexico, Korea is in things like autos and auto parts. Yeah. With China, it's another set of facts.
For a lot of American businesses, the numbers just don't add up when they consider manufacturing in the U.S. I mean, the Washington Post reported on Ivanka Trump and all of her businesses recently, and she produces overwhelmingly outside the country to do apparel and accessories and shoes. Can you imagine a set of policies and changes in policy that would make someone in her situation look at the same numbers and say, I should be making clothing and shoes in the United States?
There's no question that there are a set of policies that we need to address. And what's interesting about this...
But you're saying the answer is, if I hear you, the short answer is yes. You're saying
the short answer is yes. The long answer is, what's interesting is that with every different country that we have a large trade deficit with, we have a different set of problems. With Mexico, for example, cheap labor. With Germany, they have a misaligned currency. So if you address these issues of unfair trade practices, if you get better trade deals, if you stop things like forced technology transfer or the theft of our intellectual property, if you ensure that the sweatshops of the world live up to international standards for minimum wage and safe working conditions, if you have reasonable environmental protection, then American manufacturers can compete with anybody in the world.
One of the criticisms of the trade agreements that have permitted the kinds of problems that you have criticized is that, in fact, trade policy has been made very much with the interests of American business in mind. They lobby very hard, and they get policies that they like.
Not business, multinational corporations.
Well,
there's a schism between the small and medium-sized domestic manufacturers and the big multinationals who want to put things offshore. The other thing that's
should the multinationals and their lobbies be kept out of the trade policy making process in the Trump administration?
Well, that's look, the swamp is alive and well in Washington, but our job as an administration,
you've come here to drain it.
Yeah, we come here to drain it. Our administration is to keep the eye on the ball, and the eye on the ball is buy American, hire American.
Let me ask you if you disagree with another observation that's often made about what's hurting our own domestic production. People find it cheaper to buy goods that are made overseas very often. Donald Trump has been called to account for building with Chinese steel when he built a hotel. And it was cheaper. It was veiled through.
So let me ask you,
should things be more expensive? Should we expect that things will be more expensive?
Here's what's interesting to me. Yeah. It's like when we have these conversations, you raise a really interesting point, but then you throw in Donald Trump and what he's doing, or Ivanka Trump. It's like, I think it would be really interesting, particularly with a news outlet that is as intellectually honest and deep as NPR, to just have these kind of debates without throwing little darts in between. That was a little dart. So the answer
but
here...
it's different. The difference about this administration is people have made these decisions in their own lives.
Look, if your question is without the darts, those countries can produce cheaper, therefore we should buy their cheap stuff.
You've cut me off. My question is, should we assume that there's a virtue in buying American that would make it worth it to pay more for things, and for construction maybe to be more expensive, or the goods that we buy at Walmart to cost a bit more than they do now?
Let me give you a number of answers to that. I mean, first of all, a lot of the goods that come from abroad, which are, quote, cheaper, basically, are cheaper because state-owned enterprises have made them heavily subsidized by their government, and they're dumped into our markets. Number two, if you look at this as a movie rather than a snapshot, and you buy American in our government procurement policies, let's say it costs a little bit more. But what do you get for that?
Yeah.
You get more jobs in a community. You get more tax base. Over time, you get stronger, vibrant communities. I mean, I don't know.
What I hear you saying, Mr. Mayor, is yes, that we should. There's a virtue in our having goods that cost a bit more if they're made in the U.S. That's what I'm hearing you say.
What I'm saying is that if something looks like it costs a little more just because it's made in America, when you cost it all out, the benefits over time far outweigh the cost. Think about this.